Hello, and welcome to the Reach or Miss Show, the podcast for the customer-focused entrepreneur, where Hayut Yogev speaks with entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs about reaching or missing the critical point of approaching the right customer with the right message at the right time and place. The point where business success starts. And here is your host, Hayut Yogev.
Reach or Miss, Episode 40. The best advice of Mike Stelzner, Jeff Bullas, Mike Allton, Erik Huberman, Ian Anderson Gray, Douglas Baudette, and Jeremiah Gardner. Hi entrepreneurs reachers, we are celebrating our 40th episode, and I want to thank you, our listeners, for finding us, for coming back and listening over and over again, for your feedback, and most of all, I would like to thank you for your trust. My biggest wish, and the reason I started this podcast, is to provide each and every one of you with the most relevant and important content and tools that will help you entrepreneurs, startup founders, and small business owners to gain the fastest, biggest, and most sustainable success through an ongoing, growing stream of leads and paying customers while building your brand. Having worked in executive international brands marketing roles for the first 22 years of my career, and having worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs and startups on their global strategy, marketing, and sales for the following 10 years, I can tell you that during these crazy times of endless changes, there is one thing that hasn't changed: the way people think, desire, and decide. Marketing is all about looking at things from the point of view of your potential customers, because the money you are looking for is in their pockets. Once you learn to look at your product or service from your customer's eyes, brain, and heart, the customers and the market leadership will be yours. In this episode, we chose to walk you through the second round of the best advice for winning your customers from these 7 leaders and most successful entrepreneurs. I never know in advance what will be the best advice from my guests. There is a huge shift in marketing today, but the amazing thing is that these 7 people gave exactly the same advice we got in the first Best Advice Ever episode. I invite you to listen to this episode to hear the top advice in 2018. I first learned about Michael Stelzner in 2009 while looking for some professional information about social media, and was amazed to see all the great, most professional content Michael's blog, Social Media Examiner, was sharing. No one shared much knowledge for free back then. But it wasn't only the fact it was free. Mike Stelzner and his colleague writers opened a wide gate to this wonderland of social media. I fell in love with this blog, and a few years later, I flew more than 20 hours from Tel Aviv to San Diego to take part in the 3rd Social Media Marketing World Conference, and haven't missed one conference since. Let's listen to Michael Stelzner's best advice. You know, we are all about entrepreneurship and startups and talking about how to react and act with your customers. And I wanted to ask you about your concept or beliefs on the way a startup or entrepreneurial business, which you have been as well, should approach its customers, and give our listeners your best advice for their customers' approach or focus.
I think that when you're getting started, you really need to talk to lots of people to understand what their problems are. So that could be going to an event where lots of people that match your customer happen to be and talking to them to understand what their problems are. Or if you've already got some people on an email list, it could be sending them an email and asking them lots of questions so that you can understand what some of their challenges are. But somehow to survey or to ask what the challenges are, and I think is the number one way that anybody can be successful, because a lot of times we guess. We think everyone is like us, which is totally not true. And we say, if everyone's like me, then they'll be interested in this, and we just throw it out into the world and hope it sticks. But if you do a little bit of research, you can test those assumptions. And if those assumptions are true, then great. But if they're not, you will prevent yourself from doing a lot of work that may or may not be successful. So I think it increases the likelihood of success.
The story of Jeff Bullas with social media is kind of a small miracle. It almost seems like the social media world has chosen Jeff to write a blog about it, and not the other way around. If we want to use the social media, what should we know about customers' approach? What should we take into consideration?
Businesses start for many reasons, and some people have a grand plan when they start, and I'm on the board of a startup, and we had one idea which we thought was great. We raised money. This is in New Zealand. It's a company called Shuttle Rock, and that initial idea didn't work. And then we tried another idea. So we pivoted, tried that idea, kept raising money. That idea didn't work, but the technology we developed as we experimented has now been just won a Facebook Innovation Award globally. We have now about 30 employees. We've raised about $5 million. And so today in 2017, 5 years later, we actually have discovered the sweet spot. So the journey is not a straight line, and that is what most startups discover, is that they think they have a great idea. That idea is it. The reality is that most of the time it isn't it. I have heard some numbers saying that most successful startups pivot at least twice.
Wow. And do you think there is some way in terms of focusing your audience or how to approach them, or you should focus on your startup and it will come from there?
Oh, you've got to listen to your market. So you've got to see what works, what doesn't. So you've got to be able to quickly innovate, prototype, try it, and keep moving on. Most, and a lot of startups now are software as a service, SaaS models. Mm-hmm. They're in constant beta. The product is never finished. It's just in constant development. So you can never relax. There's competitors beating at your heels. It's a global market. It's even getting more competitive. So, you've got to listen to the market. Recently, I read some research that showed that there was the top 5 reasons why startups succeed. The number one reason is not money. In other words, you can raise $200 million and fail. The number one reason most startups succeed is timing. And I would totally agree with that, because when I started my blog, there weren't many bloggers on social media. I got my voice out there, got heard, got seen, and I picked the trend early. And some people see a trend, but they can get in too early. In other words, good idea, but wrong timing. And that's hard to pick. It really is.
Erich Huberman is a live example to the advice our last guest, Milena Lishensky, gave last week. The best is to be your own customer. That way you really know your audience and can serve them best. Erich is a young, successful entrepreneur who is the recipient of numerous awards, including 2016 Forbes 30 Under 30. Give our listeners your best advice for their customers' approach and focus.
Make sure you're understanding why they need you. Like, what is the purpose behind them wanting to work with you or buy your product or purchase your service, whatever it is. You need to understand the reasoning behind it, the logic behind it, and the emotional appeal behind it, so that you can actually position it in a way that, shows them, like, this is what you've been looking for.
Okay, they should focus on the customers. They should understand them. Do you have any advice? How should they do that?
I usually say, like, it's good to be your own customer, or would have been, because, like, that's been where we've been successful. Is I've had 3 brands, I've hired agencies, I've hated most of them, so I knew what I was looking for and what I didn't like. So I was able to create that, and was able to understand that there were a lot of people like me. So it was easy to build that out. I think that was a huge advantage with what we built, because founders of most agencies I know don't come from running their own brands. And so there's always that missing empathy of, like, understanding what the needs of their customer truly are.
It's interesting, that the best advice that I think all, or perhaps almost all of our guests is the same advice.
Yeah.
Which is, in a way, very interesting, but in the other way, we don't hear that often. You can't read it often. People are not talking about it. It's like a hidden secret of the good ones.
Yeah, it's just knowing that other side of the table is super important.
Like Jeff Bullas, Mike Allton also started to write about social media in his blog without specific intention. He was building sites for businesses, and he was writing about social media to attract visitors to his site when he found out this was what his clients really wanted. Give our listeners your best advice for the customer's approach and focus.
Sure. So the best approach that I've found for startups and really any business is not just to listen to customers, but to create opportunities to invite your customers to say something worth listening to. So what I mean by that is some companies, they don't pay any attention at all to what their customers are saying, which of course is terrible. Other companies, they'll listen to customer feedback, but they'll do nothing to solicit it. That means that the feedback they get is irregular. Maybe somebody emails you, or maybe they message your Facebook page with a comment. And it's great to pay attention to those comments and think about how you can improve. But there's an even better step to take, and that's to be proactive about feedback. So instead of waiting for it to come to you, you actively ask for feedback. Now, in most businesses, new customers have a set process and a life cycle that they go through, right? And as various points in that life cycle, you should be asking customers for feedback and ideas. These mile markers, they offer opportunities for you to offer motivation, support, encouragement. And when you execute that properly, it'll lead to not only more information about your business and areas that you can improve, but it will also increase your customer satisfaction and retention. I don't know if you know Joey Coleman. He outlines some very specific activities businesses need to take during the customer's first 100 days. So I recommend checking out his book as soon as it's released. It's not published yet, but it will be.
Okay.
I don't know when. Later this year, maybe next year.
To.
But Joey Coleman, and he's just fantastic. He was the keynote speaker at Social Media Marketing World this past spring.
I'm curious because I think all of us, all of the companies I meet and work with, everyone wants customers to be more proactive.
Right.
And to respond more and to talk to you. How exactly are you suggesting to do it better, to really make people talk to you more?
It's going to be different with every business. I know I say that a lot, but it's something that I like to stress because some of the things that I read, some of the advice that I read online, it reads like it's supposed to apply universally across the board, and it never does. I end up reading an article and then going back to my own business or whatever it is that I'm doing. And I'm like, well, this is different. I don't see how this is going to work for me. I tried to install an overhead garage door opener the other day, and it was a wireless controller for it. And this wireless controller had 2 wires, and the diagram showed 4 knobs on your garage door opener, and you're supposed to connect it to the right 2 knobs. Well, then I look at my actual garage door opener, and there are only 3 knobs. So which ones am I supposed to connect the wires to? I don't know. And the documentation didn't say. It didn't allow for any room for error or other alternatives. So I find myself often telling people, this is how I do it. This is how I've seen it. Your situation is going to be different. And this is why, again, those one-on-one conversations can be so powerful, because I can listen to your unique story, your unique business, and say, okay, well, this is the way that you might do it that might actually work for you. So to answer your question, an easy example would be for a business that has new customers coming in, and you're collecting their email addresses while they sign up for whatever it is that you do when you sell, and you identify some point in the future life of that customer when you think they're going to have at least tried some aspect of your product. So let's say you have an online course that has 6 modules. After the first module, that's a milestone, right? They've achieved, they've done that. So that might be an opportunity to send them an email and say, great, you've gotten through the first module. Good for you. These are some of the takeaways that we hope you got from it. What did you think?
It's very interesting that you talk about it, and it's also interesting what you said about Coleman, because It's really that these first days or 100 days or 30 days, I don't know how long it takes. I guess you would say that it's different for any business.
Yep.
However, it is. We are more into something at the first days. That's right.
Yeah, and it's important to have that connection right away. Now, I mean, if you're just selling an item, like through Amazon or through your own website, and you're shipping it out to customers and that's it, you don't have any kind of insight then usually in terms of their long-term usage. So you just have to kind of arbitrarily decide, okay, 5 days after the item should have arrived, then we're going to email them. But at some point you need to be reaching out. And one of the interesting concepts that Joey shared was determining the point at which the customer will have achieved success. Now, in my 6-module course example, they won't have achieved success after the first module, of course. So it's a different kind of an opportunity. But at some point, they'll finish the course. At some point, they'll have used your service and achieved something. And if you can identify it, that's the best time to reach out, not only to congratulate them, but also to get a review, whether it's a private review and feedback, or maybe it's a public review as well. Particularly if you have the kind of product where your customers are excited about it and they're going to be willing to write about it publicly. So that's a really important tactic to integrate.
Yes. Mike Allton told me the story of Ian Anderson Gray's success, and I thought I must hear his story. It's not every day I manage to interview someone that was trained as a professional singer and performer, which is not as shocking as it sounds, by the way, when you find out his mother was an opera singer, and has become one of the leading successful entrepreneurs in the world of live video. I can't wait to hear Ian at the Social Media Marketing World 18 in San Diego in February. I would like you to give your best advice to our listeners about the customer's approach or focus people should take.
Well, if I look back at my biggest successes really with this, it's always been producing content that is quality and really helps your audience. I think back, the article I wrote last year was a detailed article. It went into so much detail of.
Where did you publish it?
On my blog.
And no Medium, no LinkedIn, just your
blog.
My
blog.
Wow.
Yeah.
We want to put the link at our show notes so a lot of other people can read it as well.
I appreciate that.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
Great.
So, and this has always been my philosophy. I'm not a frequent blogger. I need to get better at that. But one of the reasons for me not being such a frequent blogger is that I put my heart and soul into the content. There's so much content out there. We're drowning in it. But I want to put in my expertise into that. I want to put the kind of articles that I want to write is making the technology accessible and easy to understand. So before that, I wrote an article on social media management tools. There's so many tools out there. How do you choose it? I saw a problem.
Sure.
So yeah, I think that's what I would say to people. Write content that is really helping your target audience and go all out. Make it as easy to understand as possible, but make it detailed. But don't just stop there. Obviously you can share that on social media, but, answer people's questions. On that blog post, I can't remember, but it's well over 1,000 comments. There's people that are going in there and asking questions. And I see a lot of bloggers out there that have closed down their comments. And although, I'll be honest with you, sometimes I feel like doing that myself. Actually, so I want to help these people. I want to serve these people. Now, not all of those people are going to become my customers, but you never know who's going to be reading that. And the news passes on to other people. And so through the fact that I'm helping all these people, that's really helped to get my name out there as an expert in this field, but also to bring customers my way. And as a result of that, I launched my first course last year on live video.
Oh, online course?
And it was kind of funny because this is my first online course. I'd been wanting to do one for ages. And I kind of knew now is the time. I need to do this now. While moving house, not a good idea.
Wow, because I'm working on my own right now, and I would have said that this is an interesting and not very easy task. It takes a lot of energy.
It does. And I'm a perfectionist. It's a bit of a disease, I think, because but in a way, because I knew I had to do it so quickly, and there were all these people out there that were asking me these questions, I knew I just had to get on with it. And I produced this course fairly quickly. I did it within a week. It wasn't perfect. Wow. And it did really well. It kind of blew my mind at how popular it became. It was using this free live video tool called OBS Studio. And I think people wanted to learn how to do it. They were really eager. So that's gone. We've got all this expertise in our heads. And I think a course is a really good way of helping people with that. But we need to just get it out there and stop being perfectionists, because since then I've produced other courses and the perfectionism syndrome has kicked in. Now, I'm really proud of the courses that I've produced since, but I probably spent far too long on making them perfect, and they didn't need to be.
Douglas Burdett is the person behind the incredibly successful Marketing Book podcast, which was named by LinkedIn as one of the 10 podcasts that will make you a better marketeer. He also runs a business-to-business marketing agency. Let's listen to Douglas's advice. Give us the best advice you can to our listeners about how should they approach the customers. What should they take into consideration there?
Absolutely. And of course, I can answer this, but I always have to sprinkle in lots of book recommendations. So
you should,
hopefully your listeners would appreciate this. One of the best things that a startup can do is to understand who their real buyer is. And I say real buyer because a lot of companies are started or are marketed, and they might even be targeting the wrong person. And there's a terrific book called Buyer Personas by Adele Rivella. It's just one of my favorite books. And, in marketing these days, despite what the marketing gurus will tell you, there is no secret sauce for marketing. But I think that understanding your buyer persona is pretty much the closest thing to it. It's really the linchpin. And basically, the buyer persona is an archetype, a fictional representative of who your ideal buyer is. And if you read Adele's book, or even go to her website, buyerpersona.com, she's got an ebook you can download, and it talks about the 5 rings of insight that you want to understand about your buyers. And those things of insight that you want to find out about your buyer's life really don't have anything to do with your product. And your salespeople are going to have trouble trying to tell you that as well, because much of this happens before they finally come to your company in search of a problem. So the more that you understand the world of your buyer and your buyer persona, what they really want emotionally, what their concerns are about a company like yours, even if it's a misplaced concern, it's enormously valuable. Everything else from your company, your marketing, your product, all can fall out of who your buyer persona is. Now, there's another book that I recommend by Aaron Ross, and he co-authored Predictable Revenue, and then he wrote a follow-up book called From Impossible to Inevitable, which he said was even better. And in the book, he talks about these 7 things that every business needs for hypergrowth. And he helped take Salesforce from 0 to its first 100 million, and he had never been a salesperson. And one of the things he talks about in the book is nailing a niche. Don't try and be all things to all people. And in that part of the book, he talks about the importance of talking to 20 people. He says it's amazing how many startups and entrepreneurs don't just go talk to 20 people. And when he says 20 people, it means not your friends, not your family, but somebody who could be objective and wouldn't mind telling you if your idea is a little bit lacking or maybe a good idea. And he said you're guaranteed to be you'll benefit, but just by talking to 20 people about your product idea and get them to poke holes in it. And then finally, there was another book that I had on the podcast by Tom Hogan and Carol Broadbent. It was called The Ultimate Startup Guide. And they are a marketing firm in Silicon Valley, and they only work with companies that have received venture capital funding. So really the cream of the crop. And that book would be an excellent read for your listeners. And in the book, they talk about some of the same things about the number one reason why startups fail is because they're creating a product for which there isn't really that much of a demand. In other words, the entrepreneur or the engineer, they think they have a very interesting solution to a problem, but it might not be a problem that really needs to be solved, which doesn't mean they shouldn't start their company, but they should be open to listening to what the customers say, back to buyer personas, in order to refine their idea. And in the book, they take you all the way through finance and everything. And it's really 85% of the book is great for any business. But in the book, it was very funny. They start and end with the fact that the icon of Steve Jobs is probably the worst thing to ever happen to startup CEOs. Because despite Steve Jobs' success, most of what he did isn't normally successful. And a lot of CEOs think that they have to behave and do everything Apple does, which is unfortunately it doesn't usually end well.
I love what you're talking about so much. And you know that CB Insight has a great survey of startup failures. The number one reason that entrepreneurs that do startup fail say as a reason for their failure is there wasn't a market need. 42%. Our last guest to share his advice with us today is Jeremiah Gardner. Jeremiah is a keynote speaker, the author of the best-selling book The Lean Brand, and principal of Move the Needle, where he has advised companies like GE, ING, eBay, Intuit, and Cisco. I really love and believe in Jeremiah's marketing attitude, so I chose to share not only his best advice, but also his surprising recommended tool. You told us a bit about your concept and beliefs, and I want to ask you, what is the best advice that you can give our listeners, and what do you think they should do or they should pay attention to in terms of customers' approach?
Yeah, so I guess the best advice I can give you is that truth never lies inside of your building. And so what I mean by that is that we can't, as human beings, predict the future. And so if we spend a bunch of our time trying to predict what customers will do and building funnels without actual data and launching product without actual validation around our riskiest assumptions, we're likely to fail. And so although all new ventures are likely to fail, how do you protect against that? How do you hedge against failure? And what I think about is that you have to embrace the unknown, and you have to get outside of your building, and you have to co-develop and build with the customer, meaning taking their input and their behavior based on experimentation, taking the evidence that you produce and following that. And it may not be exactly what you imagined it to be. In fact, very rarely does a successful startup actually end up looking just like you thought it would on day one or on year one. And so getting in front of your customers, having meaningful conversations with them, learning to build those skills are so important. And I'll make one quick other note about this is that the truth is that entrepreneurship is both a skill and a mindset. It isn't just have an idea and pursue your passions. That type of advice is really, in my opinion, is kind of bullshit, right? We hear it all the time, get out and follow your passions and follow your dreams and all these things. That's not enough. That's a great start. But the truth is that this is a skill. It's a skill to practice empathy. It's a skill to experiment. It's a skill to follow the evidence and build a team, and solve real problems. And it's a mindset. And the mindset is exactly what we've been talking about, accepting the uncertainty, accepting the fact that you don't know and that you have to go out and explore. Those things are the areas that we need to build in entrepreneurship, the skill and continually building our mindset that lead to success.
I couldn't agree more. I always say that marketing or really succeeding with customers is seeing everything from their point of view. Because the money or the use that we are looking for is in their pockets. You should go and look at what they feel and see, exactly like you are talking from the beginning of this discussion, and not being so sure of what you know. And I think this is one of the biggest challenge for startups.
Yes. Well, and here's why my hunch or my thinking around why it's challenging for us. And this goes a bit deeper and is really important to understand in this work is that the choice to practice empathy, the choice to be in front of our customers is a very vulnerable choice. It's personally vulnerable because it means that we have to choose to get outside of our comfort zones. We have to choose to listen to things we don't want to hear. We have to choose to know or to be told that we're wrong. And so that personal vulnerability, it doesn't feel great sometimes. And it's really scary when we're facing the first prospect. I've spent so much time with teams when I literally in the first hour of working with them, kick them out of the building and have them go out to find customer segments on the street, just freeze, just be paralyzed with fear. And the step isn't that, that's fun. It's that if you don't do it, the first time, then that fear will control your development. And so it gets better. The first time you do it, you learn that you can do it and that you come out okay. And the second time you do it and the third time. And so at this point, it's just a muscle for me, personally. I have no problem hearing things I don't want to hear or being told I'm wrong because I know I am. And so the vulnerability, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, or let's say, you've got your first set of seed round or wherever you are in that journey, if you're not willing to be vulnerable, you're going to have a really hard time in finding success in your new venture because it requires vulnerability from really day one, in order to go out and learn and prioritize that learning.
I want to ask you, can you recommend the best, most effective technological or digital tool that's related to customer-focused marketing or sales?
Yeah, a cup of coffee. Honestly, I've said this on countless stages and
yeah, I never heard this one. I must say it's my first.
The most powerful tool in your toolbox when it comes to marketing and when it comes to product development, when it comes to any of this type of work is a cup of coffee. And what I mean by that is it's a cup of coffee with the customer. Sure. And so, all of the digital tools that are out there, that it can be wonderful, but you can't automate a relationship that you build with your audience. And so if you're simply trying to outsource your relationship with your audience to technology, you're going to have a really hard time finding growth. And so what I always say is, the value for both your customer and yourself in a cup of coffee, which costs you very little relative to, massive campaign spends, it is actually exponentially different. And so, I am constantly finding myself coaching entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs that we have to be at the source of truth, and that's in front of the customer. And then that's going to inform which tools we then use. So, for example, as we learn about our audience, we may learn that the best tool is email. We don't know. Or maybe it's social media, or maybe it's Twitter, or maybe it's a meetup group. We don't know. And so every audience is different. And so until we learn, deeply from our customers about how to impact them, until we experiment with different tactics and techniques, we don't know how best to build our marketing engine. And so we take what we learn from empathy and from experiments, and then we build piece by piece, our execution engine around that. And so for me, the tools are just an ends to a mean. They aren't the mean themselves. And so we have to avoid kind of, at every marketing conference I go to, there's always, all the cell phones come out to take a picture, when someone shows off their marketing stack and all the technology involved. But to me, that's not marketing. To me, that's not brand. To me, that's not growth. To me, that's technology, that's based on what they've learned in the empathy work. And so for entrepreneurs, we have to go back, and learn one by one how best to build, our relationship with our customers. And that's what leads us to success.
I love it, and I love the answer. I never had that answer before from my interviewers. This is the end of our second round of the best advice ever. I hope you enjoyed it and can't wait to read your feedback and responses. So please leave us your comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Next week we will have a new guest. I'll meet you there. Bye! And for you, our listeners, until the next time, it all goes down to this. You either reach or miss. Keep reaching your goals and vision. Bye!
Thank you for listening to the Reach or Miss Show, the podcast for the customer-focused entrepreneur. You can find all the information, links, and resources that was mentioned at the show in our website, reachormiss.com. See you next week.